Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's Perashat Vayakhel has been generously sponsored by Daniel S. Loeb Torah Center, the Gold Donors, the Ash Brothers, Isaac and David Ash, as they embrace Torah knowledge, learn with passion, do with purpose, and give with generosity. If you're following the last few weeks, you know that the Parshiot have been super meaningful, inspiring, hopefully. But there's a trend over here. You have a story about people that left Egypt, Jews that were enslaved, and then they finally come out. And if we were telling the story, you'd see this amazing progression happening: the 10 miracles, the splitting of the sea, the coming up to Mount Sinai, them coming together, hearing God, Moses coming down, preparing the Jewish people to receive the Torah, and then there's a massive falling off the cliff with the Chet HaEgel, with the sin of the golden calf. And then in this we hear a little bit about the ideas of the Mishkan, and then we hear a little bit about the idea of having Shabbat. And then you hear about Moses and his bringing back the second Luchot, and that's where this week's Parsha begins. This week's Parsha begins with the day after Yom Kippur. Moshe had figured out a way of getting the Jewish people to be forgiven by God. Okay, and the first thing he does is what this week's Parsha begins with. It begins with the following words: Vayakhel Moshe, and Moshe gathered et kol adat bnei Israel, the whole community of the children of Israel. Vayomer lehem, he said to them, Ela hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. And these are the things that that God had commanded them to make. Okay, interesting. So all we know, this pasuk is a tremendous departure. Every other pasuk up until now, every other verse that you and I have read, okay, has a very clear, distinct, formula. It's God spoke to Moses. Moshe gathered the people. Moshe then gathered his brother. He gathered, the Kohanim, and then he went ahead and he taught the people. Got the Zakanim and then the people. So over here, you're missing all of that. Typically, there's a hierarchy between God, Moses, his brother, Aaron's children, the Zakanim, and then the Jewish people. That is gone over here. Okay, he brings the entirety of the whole people coming together, and we have to ask ourselves: number one is why. Okay, and my second question goes like this. Okay, pasuk says that Moshe gathered people. What? Asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. He's gathering the people because this is what God wants them to do. Okay? It's in the plural. Okay? La'asot otam. Then it says what? What are we going to do? Shabbat. We love Shabbat. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh malacha. 6 days you're going to do the Shabbat. B'yom ha'shavi'i. And the seventh day, yelachem kodesh. Seventh day is going to be kodesh. Shabbat Shabbaton. You're going to have this massive Shabbat. And that's what God wants you to do. Kol aseh bo malacha yumat. Anyone who does any work on Shabbat will be put to death. And then the next thing it says right away is Lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvotechem. Don't light fire on Shabbat. And then it's all the don'ts of Shabbat. Okay? So we have to ask ourselves, well, number one is, two questions here. Question number one is, you just went from starting this pasuk, telling me what we're going to do, and then you're telling me about Shabbat, and Shabbat is about all the things that I cannot do. And then you tell me over here that, we have this idea of Shabbat again. And after the Shabbat, what does Moshe tell me about? The Mishkan. Okay? And then we saw this pattern a little bit earlier. We saw this before. A couple of weeks ago, we saw that Moshe tells the Jewish people about the Mikdash and then Shabbat. And over there, he says to you that there's this order here, there's a pattern here to teach you that even though the Mikdash is so holy, Shabbat supersedes the Mikdash. Okay? That Shabbat is greater than the construction of the temple and its ornaments. And then in this week's Parsha, it tells me the same thing, but the order is reversed. It says Shabbat first, and then it tells me to make Mikdash. So, I say Rashi, which one is it? You can't have it both ways. It's either that Mikdash comes first and then Shabbat, and therefore that teaches you that Shabbat is greater, or the other way around, that you can't use the same logic in both directions. So let us try to walk away with some clarity in this week's Parsha, and hopefully we learn of what I think is a super deep, important lesson. When it comes to the idea of bringing the entirety of the people together, so I can understand why there's value in that. because there's something powerful about people working with one another. As a matter of fact, we all know the famous acronym for the word team, right? Lana will tell you that team is an acronym that together, everyone accomplishes more. Team. Together, everyone accomplishes more. And that's what team is. So you have teamwork, you have a community working together, people doing things together, you can accomplish unbelievable things. That is the power of a team. And therefore, Moshe is telling us here, after Yom Kippur, where we're the holiest, the highest level we could possibly imagine ourselves being at, he's saying, Am Yisrael, if you don't hold on to this idea of team, you're making a mistake. And therefore, the way in which we read the Psukim is Vayakhel Moshe. What did Moshe tell the Jewish people? You gotta stay together. The Lasot Otam is not talking about Shabbat afterwards. It's specifically talking about this power of Kehillah, of community. You just experienced Yom Kippur, and you think, oh, we're good. We know what it means to come together to ask for forgiveness. Moshe is saying, my friends, don't let go of each other. Hold on to each other, arm to arm. Never forget that the power of our people comes from us working together. And you think about it in terms of the whole entire story. That usually Perashat Vayakhel and Pekudei are read together. But this year is a leap year, so we expand it, and therefore they're separate. This week is Perashat Vayakhel, Perashat Shkalim, and next week is Pekudei. Okay, we're getting closer to Purim, which means we're getting closer to Passover. Passover. Of course it's a month of miracles, but we're getting closer. For me, it's about Passover first. So, and that's the month of miracles. That's right. It's the month of Nisim, Chodesh Nisan. So you have over here a pasuk that tells us about, you know what? I want to bring the people together to teach them a powerful lesson. You think you're holy, and now you don't need to learn about the lesson of community. It's B'davka here, where they think they're at their peak, where they reach the highest level of clarity. Hopefully after Yom Kippur, you internalize those lessons of Kedusha, of holiness. Over here, Moshe is saying, this right here, with this clarity, you got to work harder on community. By the way, this is true with everything in life. Think about the things that where we struggle with the most in life, right? It has to do with where we come together with other people. Our spouse.
Oh my God.
Work. Right? The places where our family, the places where we suffer the most, community, people, the places where we suffer the most is in the places that seem like the place that require the least amount of work. Right? Do I really have to put an effort? We got married, you put the ring on it, we go on vacation, we have family together, we got kids together, it's perfect. We understand each other. Spoiler alert, you don't. Spoiler alert. If you're not putting an effort and energy specifically in those relationships, my friends, you're going to be suffering. And therefore Moshe is saying, oh, okay, you get it. When it comes to you and God, you can put in all the work. You fasted for 24 hours, 25 hours. You stood up in shul all day. You did your thing. Amazing. I got it. That's where I need to put in my work. And therefore, when it comes to spiritual things, oh, I'm so good when it comes to spiritual things because God asked me to do it, and therefore I'm working there. But when it comes to things between ben adam lechavero, between man and man, that doesn't really require effort. Am I really as diligent when it comes to working on the relationships around me? And Moshe is saying, yeah, my friends. As a matter of fact, if we're going to use Rashi's logic that, well, if Mikdash comes first and then Shabbat, and therefore Shabbat comes after to tell you that Shabbat is greater, I would say to you, in this pasuk, in this week's Parashat, teaches us that community comes before Shabbat and Mikdash. Now, some people will say, and this is the answer to the question why the order was reversed, that the reason why the order was reversed is because before, when Moshe came down and told us about the laws of the Mikdash, the vessels, and building the actual tabernacle, Shabbat came after because in that world, the Mikdash was greater than Shabbat. And therefore, you would build the Mikdash even on Shabbat. But now that they sinned with the golden calf, Shabbat takes precedence, which is why Shabbat comes after, right? After the golden calf was last week, now it's a Shabbat first. Shabbat supersedes Mikdash, which means that our tikkun, the way in which we're able to overcome the sin of the golden calf, is by seeing the value in a Shabbat before the Mikdash. Why? Well, think about it. What was the sin of the golden calf? It was the using a material item and saying, we're going to worship Ele, these. These are your gods. That's exactly what the pasuk said. Elu Elokim, these are your gods. And in this week's Parashat, Moshe is saying, no. He's using the same word. Ela hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. What are the things? The things are community. The things are people. The things are our relationship with the people around us. And if we're not working on those things with the same effort and energy as we are, the Shabbat and the Mikdash, you can't have a Mikdash. What does Hashem want? At the end, when He says, I want you to build me a temple, He says, Banu li Mikdash, build me a temple, v'shechanti betocham, and I will dwell in them. Plural. Well, I'm making one Mikdash. I'm not making several Mikdash. We only have one temple. Right? Why is it in the plural? V'shechanti betocham. Chachamim teach us that the shechanti b'tocham is Hashem doesn't want to live in a house. He wants to live in our hearts. V'shechanti b'tocham is when you make me a mikdash, when you make yourselves into a space that is able to receive holiness. You know what happens? We draw God's light into the world, and we reflect that light into the world around us. Do you want to understand why the world is falling apart right now? I'll tell you very simply. It's because in order for us to be godly, we have to become lovers of life. What does it mean to be a lover of life? It sounds very poetic. It sounds very idealistic. But to love at its core, you all know, means to give. And therefore, the question I'm going to ask is every thought, every action of your day an expression of what you can take from the world around you versus what you can give to, provide for? How are we sharing? How are we thinking about how we can reflect our godliness? To be God, what does it mean to be a God? Think about it for a moment. God is the ultimate giver. Does God need you? The answer is nope. Does God need you to make a bracha? The answer is no. When you say Baruch Atah Hashem, you know what you're really saying? Hashem is the source of all blessing. You're not blessing God. God doesn't need you. Who are you? You're an ant. You're not going to bless God. God's infinite. We're reminded of the fact that God is this infinite being and is separate from all things. And the reason why you and I are existing right now, the reason why you and I are able to have this conversation, we could see and share, is simply because God is animating us. He is the fabric of reality. He is thinking about you and me. He's consistently giving to you. And therefore, you know who loves you more than anyone else in the world? God does. How do you change a human nature that is naturally selfish and self-centered and egotistical into one that is God-like? Well, number one is, are you thinking deeply about the people around you? Are you creating a space where you're thinking about how you can give to the other? You know, I heard many years ago this one of my rabbis told me how his wife was a very light sleeper. And when they first got married, the water made a lot of noise, like cranking noises, like banging noises in the house. But there's a mitzvah of doing al netilat yadayim. So what he would do is, the night before, he would leave a bucket of water, like in a bottle, outside, and he would do netilah outside of his house. Why was he doing that? That's a crazy thing to do. And he said to himself, you know what, like I want to love my wife. And in order for me to love my wife, I need to do for my wife. This is his thinking. And therefore, I'm going to do whatever I can to support her in a way that is meaningful to her. Not my way, her way. And the way in which we start this is not by, playing this video for our spouses and saying, look what the rabbi just said, you need to be thinking about me, and therefore you need to be doing for me. No, I'm going to tell you all right now, if you're listening to this, the way you start with love is by you doing for the other. If you're thinking about, that song, What Have You Done For Me Lately? Some people here might know what I'm talking about, right? The younger people probably don't. It was Janet Jackson. She sang a song called What Have You Done For Me Lately? If you're singing that song in your relationship, you're in trouble. Because the real song you should be singing is, what can I do for you lately? We're never here to think about how we can take from, but rather what we can give to. That's why it says, Lasot Otam. The plural over here. On the one hand, the pasuk is about gathering the people together, let them be a community, work with each other, and then you can have Shesh Yamim Taseh Malacha, then go out and do work. And then if you have that, where the whole week is about being kahal together, community, Bayom HaShvi'i, Yeh Lachem Kodesh, it'll be holy, Shabbat Shabbatot Ma'Hashem. That is the Shabbat Hashem wants. If your whole entire week is about you running around, making money, and you're killing every single person because all you're thinking about is what you can take from the world around you, you've missed the whole point. Hashem wants v'shachati betocham. He wants to be living, and he wants to be expressed in you. And the only way you and I can become God-like, godly, is by seeing each person as an expression of Tzelem Elokim, an expression of God. How do I do that? Well, the first thing is I'm not thinking about what I can take from the other person. I'm thinking about how I can love the other person, how I can support the other person. If unfortunately in Gaza, if the philosophy was not what I can take from, but rather what I could do for, they would never be spending their money building tunnels. They would never have Hamas. It would never survive. It's just a different philosophy. But when you make people so poor, you take everything away from them, the only thing they're thinking about is survival. In that space, you create the most lowest expression of a human being. It's in a place of abundance that you and I can be in a space where we can truly think about the other. But how do we get to abundance? We could only get there with each other. We could only get ourselves to this place that the world that we have, the America that we built, this country, is built on two things. Number one, God, okay, understanding there's a God, and number two is chesed, kindness. That was the greatness of this country. It was everyone knows America is one of the most philanthropic and generous country in the world, for better and for worse. And once we lose all that, we lose the power of kahal. We lose the power of kehillah. So Moshe, in his wisdom, he's like, you know what? The Jewish people, they were together as slaves, and they were the lowest base part of their reality. And now the Sefer Shemot is coming to an end. And we're going to talk about the end of the story, really. This is coming to near the end of the story. So what does he say? I want to remind you about the importance of kahal, of kehillah. I want to remind you that you need to belong to something. You can't just do it alone. It goes family, it goes community, it goes city, it goes state, it goes countries, and so on and so forth. Right? That's what this parasha is about. You want to understand the key to Shabbat? It's about loving the people. Shabbat amplifies our ability to love. What happens on a Shabbat table on Shabbat where the whole entire week was about taking? Oh, I made you a meal. Oh, get out of here. You've been undermining me the whole entire week. Why would I want to come to your Shabbat table? There is no Kiddusha. Okay, I'll end with the following. What is the difference between Kodesh and Kadosh? Kodesh with a Vav versus Kadosh. Okay, something that is Kodesh, okay, is intrinsically holy. Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. No matter what I do, that spot will always be holy. Okay, that's Kadosh. Kodesh is something that has the ability of bringing holiness into the world. It could change. My status can change from being Kodesh to not Kodesh. Right? My Shabbat has a certain level of Kiddusha, but I will choose how much Kiddusha I will infuse in my Shabbat. That depends on me. What does the word Kodesh mean? It means separation. What am I separating? My ego from the world around me. I'm creating a world where I can be intimately involved and thinking about how I can give to and not take from. The whole week I'm working. If I'm working just for myself, I'm missing the point. If your whole life becomes a life of just taking from, we're no different than the animals who are eating each other in the jungles. But if we want to elevate ourselves, like this Pasha wants us to, what Hashem wants us to do, He wants us to bring holiness into our hearts. He wants you to be Mamlechet Kohanim, a Goy Kadosh, holy people. The way you do that is by first learning to love the people around you. And if you can't do that, at the very least, love yourself. To love yourself means that you're open to the possibility of being something more, not just thinking about you. So I'm going to end with that. Vayakhel, as we came together today to hear this parasha, to learn a little bit about the laws of community and coming together, and recognizing that it is something that is often forgotten about. It's something that we don't spend enough time developing and building. May we have the merit of holding on very close to the people that are closest to us. We should be reminded that those relationships need the most amount of work and effort. It's in that effort and work that you and I are able to bring the most holy of holies into the world, and most importantly, hopefully, into our hearts. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom Avarach.